I'd like to talk about something I call fixing everything, technology and interventionist Anthropocene. And in this case, I'm going to introduce some probably unfamiliar historical figures who help to give us a bigger view of the role of technology in modern life. Now, technology has transformed the human and the natural environment over history, and it's certainly poised to do so on larger and larger scales in the future. I'm going to talk about three public intellectuals. Lewis Mumford is the first, who described the vast changes in technological capabilities and assumptions over pretty much all of human history. He did this in a 1934 book called Techniques and Civilization. And if you read Techniques and Civilization, or here I'll summarize it for you, he has basically periodized the human interactions with technology and characterized them in three different eras. The first he calls the EO technique, that is the dawn of techniques. The dawn of technology is not necessarily low technology, but it's actually very close to the earth. And it involves activities like agriculture, the use of wind and water power, which basically wind power can take you around the world in a beautiful sailing ship. The use of wood materials, which could again make something like a Stradivarius violin. So you had a very high culture, say about before about 1800, in which the things were much closer to the origin of the source than not. He characterizes the next era as the paleo technique, and he thinks this is kind of an anomaly. It's the industrial age, post-industrial revolution, where the world is running on steam power and fueled by coal. The main production is iron, and the main icon of that era would be a steam locomotive, sort of basically over and above nature, using paleo materials. He follows that up with his own era. He lived in the 1930s, he flourished in the mid-20th century, and he calls the new era of the 20th century the neo technique, for new. The new technology for Mumford include sort of high-tech materials, electricity as the power source, oil as a mobile heat source, use of aluminum and plastic, basically disposable materials, things that allowed the architects to make soaring buildings that would reach high into the sky, and characterized probably as an icon by the airplane that's heavier than air, but it can fly through the air and carry all the electronics and run on the fossil fuels sources. That was his era, and I'd like to propose that perhaps we need a future era post-Mumford, maybe a fourth era we might call the eco-technique. Eco-technology invokes the notion that we always have to live within an ecosystem, but we also are the kinds of people who make things. We are tool-making primates. That's our nature. So we'll always have technology, but we'll also have to live within an ecology. And so perhaps with solar power, wind power, and all the sorts of things that we expect into the future with sustainability, that kind of eco-technique would be the near future. But of course, it could also be complicated by the dawn of the biotechnic era with genetically modified organisms and designer genes. The nanotechnic, where we have very small molecular engines changing the way things operate, delivering drugs and processes. Or even the cyber technique, where things become very virtual in a virtual reality world. Of course, we're here at a geoengineering conference to talk about geotechnology. And so the future could be, rather than eco-technique, it could be geotechnique, with a lot of the heavy-handed intervention and control mechanisms, the kind of planet as a machine interventions that we've been talking about here. So Mumford sets the stage for this large encounter with technology, which is absolutely fundamental to human experience. And it changes. That is, we do not live in the paleotechnic anymore. We need to leave that era and move into something more sustainable. A second philosopher I'd like to talk about, again from the 1920s, J.D. Bernal, imagined the future of technology and the barriers to progress And to overcome these barriers, he talked about three things. He talked about the world, the flesh, and the devil. And overcoming the world for Bernal, he wrote this in an essay in 1929. Overcoming the world meant physical transcendence, literally moving off the planet in kind of a spaceship Earth, moving into an ideal sphere, say, that orbits the sun and collects all of its energy and provides an alternate Earth, because this Earth was forecast to become rather dysfunctional. This is 1929. We need to transcend the physical world itself. He talks about transcending the flesh, which would be physiological transcendence, the kind of making a cyborg, sort of a hybrid of humans and machines that would have enhanced memory and enhanced capabilities, kind of a bionic human. And finally, he talks about transcending our psychological limitations. That's what he means by the devil. That psychological forces inhibit the coming of the new world and the new flesh. And he even talks about the possibility of an evolutionary split in humanity between the humanizers, who are very happy to write literature and read books, and the mechanizers, who want to build the new world in outer space and in the new body. So he talks about the complacent 90% and the adventurous 10%. He actually perhaps playfully identifies with the adventurous 10%, and then talks about the grounded masses left back here on Earth and the transcendent elite whose destiny is out in the stars. A third person I'll mention here, and these are, again, people that perhaps are not mentioned at all in this whole meeting, is the mathematician John von Neumann from 1950s, where he, early in the atomic age, he asked the leading question, can we survive technology? Now remember I said that technology is essential to our human nature, that we are tool-making and process-making primates. But technology had gotten to the point in the 1950s where perhaps nuclear proliferation and perhaps the ability to intervene and control the climate could lead to a kind of a dystopian situation, to a breakdown in the world. Von Neumann said at the time, this is in a pretty popular article in Fortune magazine, he said, quote, present awful possibilities of nuclear warfare may give way to others even more awful. After global climate control becomes possible, perhaps all our present involvements will seem simple. And he also said, quote, intervention in atmospheric and climatic matters will unfold on a scale difficult to imagine at present. This will merge every nation's affairs with those of every other more thoroughly than would the threat of nuclear or any other war would have done. So he saw climate control not necessarily as a benign environmental thing, but as the possibility that it could lead to large international disagreements. Facing possible unsustainable human impacts on the environment and contemplating prospects for humanity leaving planet Earth, we might well ask, can we survive the future without technology? The will to create and manipulate things and systems of things is, after all, what transforms Homo sapiens sapiens into Homo faber, the tool-making primate. And so there have been meetings recently about so-called Starship Earth, and NASA has a project to imagine the future of what it would take to leave the planet, what kind of, say, spaceship, what kind of propulsion systems. But most fundamentally to leaving the planet would be, can we make an ecosystem that's totally controlled and contained, a sort of a biosphere that allows for the regeneration of all the materials that humans would need on such a long journey. And the answer is no, we can't. We can't, not only can't we solve these propulsion problems right now, but we can't make a closed biosphere, as the Biosphere 2 project in Arizona demonstrated. Biosphere 2, about 15 years ago, it failed for two reasons. It failed for a technical reason, that they didn't account for the CO2 buildup, and it failed for human reasons when the crew mutinied and basically broke the airlocks and opened the door to the fresh air of Biosphere 1. So if you're on a spaceship, you don't get a chance to open the airlocks. You don't get a Biosphere 1 to back you up. And so we end up with a kind of got to get it right the first time. Part of our discussions have been about human intervention in world systems, in the Anthropocene, as it's being called now. And Anthropocene is not just climate, but perhaps it's all sorts of activities, ocean ecosystems, the coastal zone, biogeochemistry, forest losses, all the chemical agents. And I wonder if we would have some discussion about fixing everything, that is, human intervention in all of the issues that are raising the issues coming to the attention of humans today. I think the way out is not perhaps with the new technological fixes. The way out in the short term is not leaving the planet. We might get some of these new relationships with technology that I mentioned, but I think that the main way out or the main goal for the future is to become more public-minded, not narrow-minded technocrats, but I like to use this term, public-minded entrepreneurs of a larger good for the whole. And history, I think, has opened up some new paths to think about this through the work of these public intellectuals I mentioned. And I'll end with a thought from Marc Bloch, who was a historian in World War II. And this is about the importance of history. He says, misunderstanding of the present is inevitable consequences of ignorance of the past. So history matters. It matters a lot. These public intellectuals made important differences in the way we think. And I thank you for your attention.